just on the same tip. With me, you know, as a mixer of when I do orchestral parts, because I work with Rob a lot. So when he's adding something, I don't mix him like an orchestra, right? So there's a realism that I don't necessarily want to fully maintain. Like the idea of sitting in a concert hall, which I've done many times, and there's something very special about it, where the violins are on the left, violas are on the right, cellos are, you know, back right a little bit, the double basses are back left. It's like, well, no, I want the basses to fill out the center like a bass would do. I don't want the bass to pull my ear. So violins, I might actually make stereo. So I might take his A and C violin and keep them wide. Maybe the B goes up the middle, maybe the B goes wide, whatever it is. I'm adjusting panning to get a sense of unrealistic orchestration, in a sense where it feels more pop and wider and like the whole stage. Because if you're in the back of an orchestra hall, right? If you're in the back of a concert hall, you're not actually perceiving precisely where the pieces are. The room is designed to reflect all the frequencies around and reverberate. Exactly. Yeah. So you're in the space. Now, I think we talked about it recently, but I went for Christmas and before Christmas and sat direct center front row of the LA Philharmonic just to see what that felt like, because I could never afford to do that. I thought it'd be a cool exercise for my stereoized brain to feel that, and I could pick out everything. And it wasn't as glued of a sound. It was very cool to hear the bow and be close to the soloist and get the energy of seeing everybody move and see their faces. That was a really cool thing. But sonically speaking, was not the ideal way to experience this. So when I mix, I don't do the classic panning. I try to do more of a pop style modern approach to the panning, and it feels really wide. And then you may then reverse the panning into some sort of short reverb hall space, whether it's Altiverb or, the Hall Room or the Bricasti thing, or a chamber or something. Reverse the panning, so then maybe that creates some sort of space and distance. I can go on about that for a while, but I think messing with the stereo field of what is a classic, classical arrangement feels unique to me.
Well, I was thinking a couple of things. One, you said before, I don't know if you used the word fundamental or something like that. If you think of the ways in which human beings have made music for maybe hundreds of thousands of years,
centuries,
is basically human voices together are the original music, because pre-instruments or but orchestra was sort of the first. Classical orchestra several hundred years ago was the first time you get lots of people playing different instruments together. So there's something nostalgic about the way that's set up, but you're absolutely right that the rules for how those are set up, if you're trying to, sort of what I talked about with Beckley a couple of weeks ago, if you're trying to get a classic acoustic guitar sound, like an amazing sound from the 60s, you can go for a certain thing. Or if you're trying to get a classical orchestra sound, there are certain layouts with the violas and the double basses over here and where the horns and the percussions in the back. But it's also interesting, it connected that to you talking about sitting front row center, which I've done at the symphony before. And I've sat essentially front row center, and I've also sat much further back. I think front row center is not the best seat in the house, despite what one might think, because what you actually want is, assuming you have an amazing symphony hall where the acoustics are incredible, you're actually getting a full experience of reverberation, all adding up a certain way. And I think that's a good way to think about it with mixing, which is there are certainly rules in some sense to how people set up an actual orchestra, but in terms of how it applies to contemporary music, there's so many ways to make it fit in. And, an orchestra is essentially made to take up the whole frequency spectrum if you're doing every instrument full on. Each of these instruments have certain ranges, for those that don't know. The different strings sort of cover certain ranges, and the sum total adds up at the most dense parts to essentially the complete frequency spectrum, including percussion and all of that. Yeah. But it's very hard to blend that in with a full-on modern mix that's also dense. So you do have to really pick your spots of, again, if we're going back to the sort of 2010s golden age of pop, where there's Max Martin production, Serban mixes, Dr. Luke, those sort of things, where there just feels like there's every vocal and every synth and every drum and everything. Figuring out where all of those things fit in your mix, probably doing filtering, things like that, become much more important when you're trying to add an orchestra to any amount of pop. You can put an orchestra and an acoustic guitar and a vocal. That's not going to be as challenging as a dense mix with drums, and bass and guitar,
no space
and vocals. Also, where do you put the strings, or where do you put the orchestra? And the answer is, it really just depends on, like, it's so song specific, part specific. Which instruments are you talking about? Is it just you're adding some string patches on top of a mix? They're going to sit different than actually trying to have an orchestra in there, where if you have lots of double basses and cellos, but you have a low synth and a kick drum, you might need to voice them a little bit higher because you're just not going to be able to compete. It's going to get messy. You're never going to get phase correct if double basses are anywhere near low synth. So there's a lot of filtering. I'm talking to someone who always finds it challenging. It's incredibly challenging to do.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.